back on the regular calendar. Item number 5, audit request 2018-108, High-Speed Rail Authority Policies and Practices, jointly submitted by Senator Bell, Assemblymember Patterson, and Assemblymember Arambula. Senator Bell, would you like to start?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to present this today. As I stated in our audit request letter, I'm here today to request a joint legislative audit committee to approve an audit to examine the efficiency and effectiveness of the High-Speed Rail Authority of California and their current policies and practices in the construction of the project. Now, without a question, the High-Speed Rail program is the largest, most complex, and in some ways far-reaching public infrastructure project we have not only in California but in the nation. This mega project puts California at the forefront of the transportation innovation. However, a project this large does not come without challenges. The high-speed rail project constantly faces a myriad of regulatory, environmental, public policy, political, funding, and other challenges that must be anticipated and effectively managed in order to have a program that successfully is delivered on time and on budget. This audit request aims to provide the independent review of the authority's existing practices and procedures. The result from the audit will provide the members of the legislature with the necessary information to allow us to provide strong oversight and guidance to ensure the project is on track to be successfully completed. For example, in this request, we are requesting the state auditor to review the contract management policies and practices, including the process for approving contractor change orders. When I was the board chair of the Santa Clara County Traffic Authority, which is the first half-cent sales tax in California, and we built many miles of freeways. I constantly challenged contractors in justifying their change order request as they could lead to significant cost overruns. This is why it's critical that we look at both the high-speed rail's contract management policies and also hold the contractors accountable to effectively use the taxpayers' money by minimizing change orders, in turn keeping project cost increase to a minimum. Both houses are aware that this is a very critical year for the high-speed rail. Today I'm here presenting an audit request. I understand the Assembly has also expressed some concerns on the authority's request to delay the release of this year's business plan and send a letter to the authority. Now, ultimately, it's my goal as chairman of the Transportation and Housing Committee of the Senate to provide a strong oversight over the authority and project, at the same time ensure the authority has the proper policies and procedures in place to allow the project to successfully move forward. Thank you, and we have my co-authors. I'll turn it over to my co-authors, Assembly members.
Thank you, Senator. Members, I appreciate the opportunity to join with my colleagues in presenting. The more we learn about the high-speed rail project, the more we are faced with the necessity and the need for a forensic, thorough, and independent audit. We've learned, for example, that we're on almost an 8-year delay. We have seen executives departing, and it's taken a period of time to fill those executive positions in a time when the project is in a very critical period of time. We've learned also that the authority has made emergency internal fund transfers from utility accounts to the construction accounts in order to keep the hard hats working in Central California. And just a couple of weeks ago, we found out that the initial operating segment has jumped from $6 billion to $8 billion now to almost $11 billion. These are facts and trajectories that cause all of us to have some real concerns. Many of you come from local government, either as mayor or city council or board of supervisors, and if you were to see these kinds of signs in an infrastructure project in your backyard where you were responsible for oversight, you really would see these as real red mark signals that an independent, nonpartisan audit to find out what's going on is really important. And members, we're really way past the politics of all of this. It really doesn't matter if you think the High-Speed Rail Authority is doing a good job, whether the high-speed rail is a good idea, bad idea, or if you're caught in the middle and undecided. The set of facts and concerns that we are raising that have come out recently point squarely to the need to approve this audit today, and we respectfully ask that you approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Mr. Arambula.
So first, thank you to my colleagues for joining me in this audit. I am here today to support the audit request of the High-Speed Rail. As one of the two members appointed as an ex officio member of the board, I would like to ask your support for this audit. We know that many of the financial overruns have been caused by delays in accessing land and delays from litigation. This audit sheds a light on how we improve delivery of the project moving forward more efficiently. In my district, the positive effects that high-speed rail is already creating is being felt county-wide. High-speed rail is having the largest impact in the Central Valley, with $1.2 billion of economic activity and 6,800 job years of employment valley-wide. High-speed rail has had the largest impact in Fresno County. Between July 15th and June 2016, high-speed rail resulted in over 3,000 job years of employment and about 30% of the total jobs that Fresno County economy added during that time. In 2015, Fresno's unemployment rate dipped below 10% for the first time since the recession of 2008 and only the fourth time in the last 25 years. The county has experienced 3 consecutive years of annual employment growth over 3%. Prior to 2014, Fresno County had just 1 year of 3% employment growth since 1990. With any large infrastructure projects, there are bound to be overruns, but taxpayer dollars must be spent responsibly, and this audit will help ensure that projects are being delivered more efficiently. These positive impacts will be felt by all communities along the high-speed rail route. Additional transparency will ensure public trust in California's effort to build the first high-speed rail in North America. As the Fresno Bee said this morning, the more information we get, the better. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Ms. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As members indicated, obviously this is an audit of high-speed rail, really focusing on contract management. First objective is looking at the authority's policies, procedures, and processes for managing contracts, awarding contracts, managing those contracts, and doing things to contain costs by tracking contracts, reviewing invoices, and ultimately paying those invoices. As Senator Bell indicated, one key issue he is asking us, members are asking us to look at, is the change order process. The frequency of change orders, the significance of those change orders, what kind of process has the authority established to address change orders throughout the project. And looking at the economic impact, we've been asked to the extent we can possibly do this, and certainly we will look to see what the authority has done as far as evaluating the economic impact of the efforts for constructing high-speed rail in California and what the impact has been on communities, particularly those communities right now in Central Valley where this first segment or first phase of the project is under construction. Also determining contracting with small and disadvantaged or micro businesses. There's a provision that the authority, their goal is to have 30% of their contracts to be with small, disadvantaged, disabled veteran micro businesses. So we would assess the extent to which the authority has been able to accomplish that goal. And then the last couple of objectives are related to a sustainability policy, looking at both economic outcomes, but also environmental. What are some of the expected environmental benefits of having high-speed rail in California, and how is the authority assessing those benefits and communicating those benefits? And then the last objective, to the extent we can, again, we will certainly look to see what the authority is doing as far as their efforts to try to partner with other transportation entities or transit or rail lines to try to expedite completion of the project in California. The budget for the project, or for the audit, is 2,600 hours. That would take us between 6 and 7 months, probably closer to 7 months. We may need to hire a consultant with respect to this, an economist perhaps, maybe some construction expertise. We haven't made that determination, but I wanted to let the committee know that as well. We always look for assistance in the event, particularly a high-profile, very important project like high-speed rail. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there witnesses in support of this request? Seeing none. Do we have a representative of the California High-Speed Rail Authority? Please come forward. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Are you here on behalf of the...
I am. I represent
Yes.
small business, Outback Materials. We were awarded the purchase order for the ready-mix concrete on the project in 2013 through Tudor Perini Zachary Parsons, who was awarded the contract for construction package 1. And at the time, we had 5 operations in the eastern or Sierras, Mariposa, Auberry, some small towns in Assembly Bigelow's area, and had been there for just over 40 years. And when we heard the news about the high-speed rail project, it was something we wanted to get involved in. At the time, we had 32 employees and families, and our payroll was about $1.2 million. At the end of this year, our payroll was over $6 million, and our employee count was 92 people and families. So the employment brought as a result of this project to our business and other small businesses that, frankly, I'm sort of I don't know that I represent them officially, but there's a lot of small businesses that I work with every day that couldn't be here because they drive their own trucks or they're 1- or 2-man operations. So we've had a huge impact. We've invested $7 million in new trucks and a new concrete plant with all the new environmental technologies that go along with those things, and are recycling 100% of our water in all of our concrete for the project. As well, we're implementing a clean technology. We're replacing cement with liquid carbon dioxide into our mixes that allows us to use CO2 waste and put it back into concrete where the material is sequestered, and able to reduce our carbon footprint as a result of this technology. And because we're able to build a new plant as a result of this project, we provide cleaner concrete and lower carbon emissions to Fresno.
All right. And you may have done this, but could you restate your name and your
Sure.
affiliation for the record?
Curtis Lovett is my name. I'm the owner of Outback Materials, ready-mix concrete company.
All right. Thank you very much. Welcome, sir, on behalf of the California High-Speed Rail Authority.
Thank you, Chairman Maritsucci, members of this committee. My name is Dan Richard. I'm the chairman of the board of directors of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. I just, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, make just a very few remarks and certainly be happy to answer any questions from you or the members of this committee. As Senator Bell said, the California High-Speed Rail Program is the nation's largest infrastructure program. We are very aware every day that we are the stewards of billions of dollars of public funds. This includes not only the federal monies that came to us through the Stimulus Act, but at this point, we've drawn down some of the state bond money under Proposition 1A, and because of actions of this legislature at the request of the governor, we have access to funds under the cap-and-trade program, and we're expending those. So there are public dollars involved here of very large magnitude, and we recognize the oversight responsibility of this body to make sure that those dollars are spent in the best possible way to accomplish the objectives. And so I'm here to say that we will be fully cooperative, as we have been in the past. We will be fully cooperative with this audit request. We will work with the Auditor General's office as openly and as effectively as we can. And I'd like to just, for a moment, underscore that point by emphasizing 3 things. I was appointed to this position in 2011, and in early 2012, I became the board chair. About 2 days before I became the board chair, it was reported that the Auditor General was highly critical of the High-Speed Rail Authority because 22 or 23 recommendations had been made by the state auditor and been ignored completely by the High-Speed Rail Authority for 2 years. And I pledged that as soon as we took over, my very first act upon assuming the gavel was to create a Finance and Audit Committee of the High-Speed Rail Governing Board. In charge of that committee is the retired Vice Chairman of Bank of America. It's a very serious committee. Their work is open and public. Their meetings are open and public, and their documents are on our website. I believe it was within 4 or 5 months that all but one of those those auditor recommendations had been fully implemented by the High-Speed Rail Authority, and the one that wasn't, it was agreed, was outside of our purview because it related to the peer review group. We were very serious in how we addressed that, and to the extent that this audit, we would hope that it shows that the processes and procedures that we've put in place are strong and protective of the public interest, but we're human beings, and if we have not been perfect, to the extent that there are deficiencies that are found, weaknesses or areas that need improvement, we will immediately and aggressively move to implement those. That is my pledge to you, members of this committee, and to your colleagues across the legislature. I do want to tell you that we have an internal audit function. We very actively every year audit across our organization under our structure, which I tried to set up to mimic essentially a corporate governance structure. That audit function reports not through our executive director, but directly to the board, which is appropriate. So I also want to say that there have been other audits that have been done external. In 2013, the Congress of the United States directed an audit through the Governmental Accountability Office. That was an extensive audit of our cost estimation practices and procedures at that time. And I think I'm fairly characterizing it to say that the GAO audit at that point found that our cost estimation procedures and other procedures were reasonable and consistent with federal best practices. However, starting in 2015, we've been in extensive construction in the Central Valley. There are about $3 billion worth of contracts underway right now. There are hundreds of businesses involved. There are major contractors. There have been change orders. There has been cost growth. And I say, sitting here today, that I think this is an appropriate time for this body to take a snapshot look at how we're doing. And as I said, to the extent we're doing well, we'll be pleased. To the extent that there needs to be improvement, you have our commitment to do that as quickly and thoroughly as possible.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee, starting with Mr. Obernolte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Ms. Hell. So when the voters approved Proposition 1A in 2008, one of the assurances that was given to them was that the High-Speed Rail Authority would be capable of operating largely without subsidy once it had been constructed. So in the outline of your audit, you mentioned evaluating different economic outcomes with the authority, and I'm wondering if the evaluation, with the cost growth that has occurred, if evaluating whether or not that's a reasonable assurance still, in other words, if the High-Speed Rail Authority will be able to operate without taxpayer subsidy when it's complete, if that's part of the scope of the audit that is being proposed.
Mr. Obernolte, I wouldn't see that in the current scope of the audit. When we're considering economic impact, it's more, my perspective, and doing the analysis with staff is looking at the positive, hopefully in most cases, economic impact of the communities within the Central Valley where it's currently being constructed, and then certainly in future phases of high-speed rail. So we weren't necessarily looking at, we have looked at that in the past when we've looked at the business plan for the High-Speed Rail Authority. The first audit that we did several years ago now looked at the business plan and looked at financing. What were the expectations as far as federal money coming in, ridership, how much the funding that would be generated, revenue generated from ridership would help pay for the system, particularly maintenance and operations ongoing. I don't see that in the current scope and objectives. This is more about contract management, change orders, and then contracting with small businesses, the benefits that have been derived from that, not necessarily whether or not the system will not need subsidies from either state or federal government.
Okay. Well, I'm not trying to be cynical, but if it seems like a self-fulfilling prophecy if we're asking whether or not a large amount of construction activity is going to have a positive economic impact on the communities that high-speed rail goes through. I think the answer is clearly yes, and maybe you might quantify how much.
Certainly.
However, I don't think I would be alone in opining that if we're going to undertake an audit, then let's be thorough and let's audit the overall impact economically on California. And I'd be very interested in an evaluation of the question of whether or not high-speed rail will be capable of operating without taxpayer subsidy when it's complete, given the recent cost overruns. So let me shift that to Mr. Richard. Can you comment on those assumptions and those assurances that were given and whether or not that continues to be the case?
Yes, Assembly Member, I'm happy to do that. First, as you noted, the Bond Act requires that, and we have this clearly in mind every day, that the system must be self-sustaining and operate without an operating subsidy. I will point out that we're in the process right now of developing our 2018 business plan, which is to be delivered to this body this spring, and we have just worked with the leadership in this House to make sure that the timing in which we deliver that's consistent with the legislative oversight. That business plan must, by statute, address this question that you're raising. And so whether this body decides to include that in the audit or not is up to you, but it will be before you in the form of our business plan, and there are outside peer review experts who look at that question as part of their analysis of the business plan. They'll be making their findings. They report to you, basically, under the statute, and so there will be a number of different pathways. I'm not objecting to any additional pathways because it goes to the heart of the question of whether or not the high-speed rail program is ultimately beneficial for the state. If it can self-sustain its operation, that's also the basis that you know as a businessman is how we would raise private sector revenues based on the results of operations. So it's a fundamental question, and we should be having that conversation with you. Whether it's through the business plan or the audit is up to you.
Well, thank you. That was very responsive. I would urge this body to consider including that in the scope of this audit, and not out of any distrust necessarily of the High-Speed Rail Authority, but more out of a desire to see an independent set of eyes cast some light on this issue. And I think if we're going to do an audit, let's do a thorough audit, and let's make sure that we put all of these questions to bed. So thank you very much for the answer.
Sir. Thank you, Ms. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions and a comment. So, and the question, first one, and they're for the auditor, it follows up on our colleagues' comments about how thorough the audit could be, because we really want to make sure we are not setting forth an audit that not only has a foregone conclusion, but gins up only one side. And with respect to the economic impact that high-speed rail can have on a local community, which is very important in telling that it's having a real impact, to Madam Auditor, does the audit as written give you the ability to look at not just the economic impact it's having, but those dollars that are being spent are not being spent elsewhere? Because what we need to do is make sure that we are spending the dollars in the absolute best way we possibly can and getting the best return for taxpayer dollars. Now, I, in the spirit of wanting to make sure it's a thorough audit, wonder if you have the flexibility to not just look at here's how many jobs have been created, here's the economic activity as a result of high-speed rail. Do you have any flexibility or freedom or methodology where you could say, and here's where it could have been spent, or this was the best way to spend those dollars, because that's even more valuable to us as a body?
That's a great question. As I indicated, in the scope, it wouldn't necessarily be contemplated in the scope of the audit right now. Certainly, we could look at the source of funding for the construction of the project, and as Mr. Richards indicated, there's some cap-and-trade money, and certainly there's policy decisions as to what cap-and-trade money could be used for. I think what we would need to be able to do in this audit is look at how the High-Speed Rail Authority is using the various sources of funding and the benefit that's being derived from that. I don't think we could necessarily opine or make a determination, well, that money would have been better spent fixing roads or bridges or whatever, or investing in some other policy area in the state of California. I don't think that's something that's called for in this particular project, but we certainly can look at the funding that the authority is using and how is that money being invested in California, and is there an economic benefit short-term and certainly long-term.
Okay, and what I would like to see, and I encourage us as a body to make sure that we consider that as well. which is there's an opportunity cost for every dollar that is spent. And I've got a very long list of other transportation projects that we could be having a great return on mobility and quality of life for Californians. And those dollars are going to go to high-speed rail. So I think that's a lens through which we need to do that. I wish the audit had the flexibility to provide you with that. Also on the environmental impacts, because we do hear a lot about high-speed rail having the potential, at least from its advocates, to reduce greenhouse gases and to have a positive environmental impact. I'd like you to address more how you're going to be equipped to determine that those environmental impacts are real, particularly with respect to greenhouse gases, and that it is high-speed rail that is having that positive impact, if there is one, and not other factors that can weigh in, because we are, as a state, rightly so, tackling greenhouse gas emissions, and I think aggressively, and we need to continue doing that. We want to make sure that we don't ascribe to high-speed rail reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that may have had no causal connection. Can you address that, please?
Certainly. There's an objective in the audit analysis that talks about sustainability and certainly looking at economic and environmental impacts. And the way the objective right now is crafted is to start with the authority's efforts to evaluate. So we would have to take a look at that. We may need to hire an expert to assist us in this, and also determining whether or not you can isolate the the environmental benefits that high-speed rail will bring to the state of California. Are you able to, or is the state or the authority able to isolate that impact? And if they are claiming to, then have someone assist us in doing an analysis of that to see whether or not that evaluation is reasonable. I think that is the approach that we would take at this point in time for that particular objective.
Oh, good, because I think that's going to be critical. And in order for this to have a result at the end that is useful to us, and here's what we need to do for California, and here's the positive impacts it has, it is essential that you have the flexibility to do that, and I encourage it. And those are the two questions, but also just a comment. Every red flag you could possibly raise about a public works project is raised when it comes to high-speed rail. Yeah. And it's not through bad actors. It's just a fact, whether it's cost overruns, change orders, and the costs that they've had for the project, the litigation impacts, and otherwise. So I'm pleased to see an audit that is beginning to tackle at least some of that. And I just want to applaud our colleagues for bringing a unique bipartisanship to this request that we don't often see with high-speed rail. It's alarming, the red flags that get raised with high-speed rail, and how many audits have died in this committee and efforts in the legislature to address that fairly. And I really applaud our colleagues in bringing a bipartisanship eye to this. I will look forward to this audit and hope that we will make good decisions based on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go forward, let me remind the committee that we do have a committee rule that at the time of the hearing, an audit request may only be amended if the amendment does not substantially affect the feasibility, scope, or cost of the proposed audit unless the requester wishes to substantially amend a request. The requester may ask the committee to hold the request until the next committee hearing. And I see Senator Bell frowning there. So,
Mr. Chairman, just quick. I think it's important to respond to the bipartisanship here, the concerns and questions that have been raised. What we are all trying to do is to get past all of the noise, to get past all of the politics, to get down into a thorough audit that is going to give us a very good heads up as to what is coming and what has happened. In a bipartisan way, we have made an understanding with one another, and we will keep to that understanding. However, I need to point out that, as the chairman has mentioned, and not to put words in his mouth at all, this is probably the most serious period of time for high-speed rail. The audit helps us get there. I will be looking genuinely for this business plan with new leadership, because for me, the big question here is, with the cost exploding and the finances finite, is there enough money to complete from Central California into the Silicon Valley. I think there's some real questions about that. And so, yes, the audit does have address some of that. But I do look forward to the fact that there will be, with new executives and with new a new look by those new executives for this business plan. Members, we're going to have a real opportunity to take a good, hard look at that business plan. And I am hoping, and I believe, that there will be a good faith effort to demonstrate whether you can or cannot get into San Jose. This is, for Central California, we have a lot at stake here. Whether you're for it or against it, or you're non-committal, the worst thing that can possibly happen is if we started in a field outside Bakersfield and ended in a field outside Merced. So completion really does bring the full fruits of what we are hearing here from this bipartisan group. So I'm really going to look forward to digging in. I'm going to ask my colleagues as well to take a good effort when we have the chance to review that business plan to really ask the question, does this get completed with the existing funds? Because if it does not, this body and the governor and others are going to have to take a good hard look at whether or not additional money is going to have to be requested from the people of California.
All right, thank you. Senator Bell, is this in response to?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to remind everyone to keep their comments focused on the requests before us.
Well, I think that the business plan, the audit are all interrelated. The audit will deal with just a quick look at the existing cost-benefit, the cost of the projects, focusing on a particular problem of efficiency in building the project on time and on budget. We have to focus the audit on that, and that's why the audit was focused on building the project on time and on budget. Once we get the audit, it doesn't mean that's it. We have the business plan, and we can subsequently ask for additional research and audits and other studies that will then, after we do this audit, look at a process that we could set up, if we want to put it that way, to continuously audit and get recommendations from independent sources as we go along with the project. I'd like to point out that the economics of this potential is immense. I represent Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is watching this project. They would like to locate high-tech facilities in the Central Valley. They see a huge asset in, and I hate to say this, but being a San Jose State student, Fresno State has a wonderful School of Engineering and Business department. And I know that we can have a Bulldog-Spartan alliance with this project, right? And we're good friends. We love that red tide coming to San Jose every other year. But there is a synergy in the economics and the business sense of connecting Silicon Valley with the Central Valley. And there is a potential for the growth of the economy that's immense. And when you talk about Apple and Intel and all the great companies that we have in Silicon Valley, they're in my district, it is a possibility. It doesn't exist unless there's a efficient transportation system. Doesn't exist. It hasn't existed in the past, and it won't exist in the future unless we have an adequate, efficient transportation system. So I think the economics obviously drives ridership, and ridership drives the operational impact in terms of cost per rider and in terms of whether or not a subsidy is needed and so forth. And I think till we see the business plan reflecting some of these issues, They can certainly, I would ask the High Speed Rail Authority, as our ex-official members from the legislature, that they focus on, because the committee asked that here, that the business plan maybe give it special attention, maybe have some independent review verifying the operational aspects, and share it with the legislative members during the hearings that are upcoming in a couple months, because I think that's important to show. It'll probably be a range, because the project's not going to be completed for several years, so you have to look at the further you get out in terms of finishing the project. You're going to have a range. You're going to have it has no impact on the economy, and the Bulldogs can't come to San Jose, and the San Jose can't come to the Bulldogs. That could be the low end of the range. The high end of the range is what I'm talking about in terms of the potential for the connection with Silicon Valley and Fresno State's a wonderful school, and I think the academic institution will drive the attraction, and Bakersfield State also. I think I'll just mention Bakersfield State for Senator Fuller, my friend. But I think both schools have excellent engineering departments. Excellent. They're top notch, and there's such a great potential that we ought to examine that. It'll be a range, though.
All right. Thank you, Senator. Mr. Acosta.
Well, the senator left out the Matadors of California State University Northridge, which has a wonderful program. You could keep going, and we've got a great CSU and UC system, as we all know, and appreciate it. Okay, well, we'll get a poster. We need posters in here. Okay, so to my colleague, Assemblymember Obernolte point, I have a question for the auditor, and I have a couple of other quick questions as well. Ms. Howell, the chair mentioned about a rule about amending audits, et cetera, with the indulgence of my colleagues who brought forth the audit. And of course, any rule can be waived. We just waived one a little bit ago on another audit to move the consent calendar. Do you see all this talk about whether or not the high-speed rail is self-sustaining, about this report that we're looking for, and we've all agreed that that's something we really need, this business plan that seems to me that has been amended and needs to be amended again. It was sold to the public in a certain way, this proposition, and now it seems like we're the cart's before the horse again, and we're going backwards saying, is this even viable? Do you see it possible under the scope of the audit, without materially changing the cost, the time frame, et cetera, this audit being able to encompass whether or not high-speed rail is self-sustaining? And then I have a comment or a follow-up after that, if I may.
Well, as I indicated, Mr. Acosta, with Mr. Obernolte's question, it isn't contemplated in the current scope and objectives. It would be an additional objective. I think what we would need to do, and Mr. Richards, I think, indicated the business plan was coming out in April or May, perhaps. It would be additional work that we would need to do over and above what's in here, determining whether or not it's a substantial change. It's a new objective. I think the committee would need to decide if that's something, and the member wanted to amend it. We certainly could look at the business plan, but if you wanted us to do an analysis similar to what we did in our prior audit, that was a fair amount of work as far as looking at the business plan, understanding the various funding sources, because the concern we had in the first, and it was their first business plan, was the reliance on private sector investment as opposed to federal money coming in. There was federal money that was proposed, but at that point, really the only federal money that was invested at that point in time was through the Recovery Act. It was, I think, maybe a couple billion, or I don't remember what the dollar amount was, but it was limited as far as federal money. There was question as to how much private sector money would be invested, so there really was a tremendous amount of reliance at that point in time on the bond money and state funds. So we would need to do, to get at that question and to do a fair analysis, I think a fairly substantial amount of hours would need to be added to the audit to really take a hard look at the business plan and engage with the High-Speed Rail Authority to understand how they came up with their new plan, particularly with respect to financing for the system and then their eventual goal of having it be self-sustaining. I don't know if that,
Well,
again, it's the committee's.
yes, it is the committee's purview, and I think that's something that, this should be one of the fundamental questions that we ask in this process, because this is an opportunity this far in, I mean, a decade virtually into this, the proposition and the funding starting to roll out, et cetera, that we're looking at massive cost overruns, delays, and we are in the easiest part of the construction, in my humble opinion, not being a construction magnate here. But it seems to me that all the reports, all the studies indicate this should be this. I understand there's been lawsuits and there's been delays, et cetera. That's just part and parcel. But we haven't even approached the Tehachapi's yet to get it to L.A., which is, by the way, a commitment of the proposition, and that it is self-sustaining, and it's going to meet these requirements and these requirements in terms of people. And if you look at folks in my district, they'll tell you they're not going to drive south half an hour and literally bypass Burbank Airport and the multiple airlines that are competitive there to get on a train and go north when they can just be on a plane in an hour. And that's a subject for another debate, but it's part and parcel with the discussion that we're having here, because the policy decisions of whether future cap and trade money is allocated is influenced, by all the aspects of the economic data. And that's a big, if not one of these, is if we all knew in this body and in our respective chambers that this was, I'm just pulling numbers out of thin air, this was going to require a $5 billion a year subsidy or a $1 billion a year subsidy, or it'll make money, those will influence whether or not we use cap and trade dollars now to get this constructed for a future benefit. I think it's self-evident, as has already been mentioned, about the businesses being in those areas, and God bless them. I have family and friends in the Central Valley, and I think, it's great that they're doing well, sir, to your business. But we're talking about a policy decision that affects the entire state of California, not just one piece of it, not just Silicon Valley, not just the Spartans and the Bulldogs. Maybe their booster clubs can take up and buy a train here, but we're talking about something that I'd frankly like to see, and agree with my colleagues that this scope needs to be tweaked if they're so indulgent, because that would really encourage me to support it. I have to be supportive anyway, but and I shouldn't tip my hand, but this really should be a more comprehensive audit than what I see now, and I'd be a little bit disappointed if we don't add that element to it, quite frankly. Thank you.
Right. Any other questions from the committee? Any public comments? Anyone from the public to comment on this matter? Please come forward. Seeing no one rushing forward. All right. This is an opportunity for the requesters of this audit to make any closing comments, and perhaps if you'd like to address the request made by several members of the committee to potentially, as the auditor characterized, adding another objective to the audit request or not, please address that also. Starting with the lead requester, Senator Bell.
Well, I think I urge support for the audit. This is a bipartisan request, and details of this request have been worked out in a bipartisan fashion. We will respond to the concerns on the business plan and have in about 2 months, quicker than the audit's results come in, information regarding the operating feasibility of the high-speed rail. After that, when the audit's completed, if we want to add something down the road, we can do that, and that's the way I would like to propose we handle that particular issue. I urge support for this request.
Thank you.
As I stated earlier, the nature of bipartisanship is that nobody gets the whole loaf. And that's just the way it is. I want to say I think we've made significant strides with the audit. I'm going to encourage a support vote for it. And I think also the obvious realization of everybody here that we're in a significant era with respect to this project. And this audit and the business plan and our oversight duties and responsibilities going forward in this year will have to be very much focused on a lot of the deep questions. My suggestion is that we will open this audit according to the scope. We have agreed to that scope, and the auditor has a sterling reputation of getting to the bottom of the scopes that she audits, and we appreciate that. We have commitments here from the high-speed rail leadership that this business plan will, in fact, address as deeply and as completely as possible. Really, what I think is the big question in the room. Is there funds to complete, to even get valley to valley? That is up in the air, it seems to me. So this is going to be an ongoing set of circumstances. We're going to look forward to working diligently with respect to the business plan. And as the Senator suggested, as we get into the audit and as we see the business plan, there may very well need to be a deeper and more significant dive. But right now, this is what we have agreed to, and I think we should be consistent with our commitments one to another and ask for your aye vote.
Actually, it's been moved by Ms. Rubio and seconded by Ms. Baker.
You know, I again want to comment my colleagues for the bipartisan nature of this request. It's important for us as Californians to get to the truth, and this audit will help us to do just that. I hope as we look at the audit, one of the factors we look at is the fact that time is money, and that the delays and litigations themselves are costing the authority. What do we do as a state to ensure the viability to help create the efficiencies we need within the authority? And how we are looking to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars must also mean that we help to create some momentum for a project of this magnitude. I look forward to the rest of the state realizing the benefits that are occurring right now in my community. And I invite each and every one of you who are here to come and see my district and see where high-speed rail is being built.
All right. I want to join my colleagues in thanking the requesters of this audit in a bipartisan manner. I think this is, I agree with my colleagues that this is a welcome development to have an independent, nonpartisan audit on the biggest infrastructure project in the history of the state of California. And on that basis, I join my colleagues on a bipartisan manner to support this audit request. With that, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call to approve audit number 2018-108. Assemblymember Marisucci.
Aye.
Marisucci, aye. Acosta.
Aye.
Acosta, aye. Baker. Aye. Baker, aye. Santiago. Obenolti. Obenolti, aye. Rubio? Aye. Rubio, aye. Wood? Aye. Wood, aye. Senator Roth? Allen? Bell? Aye. Bell, aye. Cannella? Aye. Cannella, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Laura? Mendoza? Short one vote.
All right.
The audit's on call.
We are short one vote, and so this request is on call. Thank you very much.